Hello and welcome to Instant Insights. My name is Isabel Al-Dhahir. I'm a principal analyst in Global Data's Strategic Intelligence team. At Global Data Strategic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. The conversation today will revolve around China's tech industry, the ambitious government policies, and the geopolitical tug-of-war that is shaping it. I'm joined by Rory Green and Bill Rojas. Rory and then Bill, would each of you introduce ourselves to our listeners?
Hi, thanks for having us on, Isabel. I'm Head of Asia Research, Chief China Economist at TS Lombard Global Data.
Hi, Isabel. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Rojas, based in Hong Kong, and I work in the strategic intelligence team as well as Director of Technology.
Thank you both. Now, the backdrop to today's conversation is largely drawn from the ongoing trade war between the US and China and the recent retaliatory escalation of tariffs on both sides. However, the context and the power struggle really goes back much further than just 7 or 8 years. You could go back 40 years ago when Deng Xiaoping made the prescient comparison that rare earth elements are to China what oil is to the Middle East. China has understood for a long time the importance of self-sufficiency and the impact that it has on both technological and geopolitical weight globally. Since 2018 and the onset of the US-China trade war, this question of self-sufficiency for both the US and China has become even more important as sanctions, blacklists, and tariffs enter the picture. Rory, if you agree with this, I would say the rise of China's tech industry was not an accident of circumstance. The Chinese government has played a critical role in its success, acting in various different capacities. For example, strategist, regulator, funder, partner, customer. Could you expand on the role that China's government plays in shaping the tech industry? And what would you say have been some of the most successful initiatives?
Yeah, I think it's been hugely important in shaping the Chinese tech industry, and I think increasingly so post-COVID. If you read Xi Jinping's speeches and the various policy documents, it's clear that, right from the very top, from Xi himself, that he is all in on technology and views it as something of a panacea for a bunch of prospective problems China's facing, be that macroeconomic, social security, national security, geopolitics. So it's very, very much coming from the top, a sharp focus. And the way that the China, sort of the big picture of how the sort of industrial policy is shaping the tech sector, you can almost characterize it like throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. Beijing sets the target and the directive, which wall is the spaghetti going to be chucked at, and then mobilizes and guides national resources to achieving these goals. So human capital, finance, land, regulatory, as you said, Isabel, infrastructure. And once that's set, it begins the flywheel process, and then at a local, provincial, private sector level, you have these resources being utilized and applied in quite a competitive ecosystem. And this is very powerful. It works exceptionally well in China, which has a large domestic market, sufficient internal competition, consistent policy support, really produces consistently technology breakthroughs and winners. So if we take the electric vehicle industry as a prime example, we get the state building out the charging infrastructure, providing cheap financing, STEM graduates, existing already was a large manufacturing workforce. Then you have the domestic demand side with subsidies for consumption. That's a lot of resources to chuck at an objective. And it works. We've got about a dozen firms and globally competitive. Not all the spaghetti will stick on the wall. A lot of these firms are going to go bust, but the ones that do survive will be world leading and globally competitive. And this process repeats across industries, creates positive spillovers, and we can see this emerging into the next sort of China tech shock, the next industry to emerge off the rank. And this is, I think, robotics. Picture this, Bill, you may have seen this, Isabel, you might not have caught it yet. The state TV program, most watched program in the world, 1 billion people watching it, the New Year's gala. normally sort of a comedy show, a few skits. This year, one of the features, traditional Chinese dance, the curtains lift up, and it's humanoid robots that are doing the dancing. The very clear signal that this is a policy priority. The impact has been enormous. Robotic stocks booming. Everyone I speak to is trying to invest in the sector. And these companies are tapping into the EV supply chain for batteries, deep sea for programming, and yet again highlighting the very effective way that industrial policy is utilized in China.
Thanks, Rory. It's a very comprehensive answer. Another area where China has been particularly successful is 5G. According to global data estimates, China is home to over 4 million 5G base stations, and there are 1.7 billion 5G subscriptions, meaning a population penetration rate of 125%. Bill, could you speak about how China developed such a strength in 5G, and also what can be learned from China's extensive 5G patent portfolio?
Right. So cellular wireless technology in China dates back to the days of 2G and 3G. And the policy for developing wireless technology was actually under the control of the People's Liberation Army in a agency called the Commission for Science, Technology, and Defense, or COSTEN. This is the group that was responsible for frequency allocations and the general telecom development. And they interact with the ministries such as the Ministry of Science and Technology and the Ministry of Industry, Information and Technology, MIT. But the policy was originally set by COSTEN, and they wanted to basically build out wireless technology. They wanted the latest and the greatest technology. They wanted to have a say-so in the United Nations ITU's 3GPP standards, which they did. So this was just like Rory mentioned earlier, it was a top-down strategy. China had the benefit of having an excellent tier one national university program, so they turned out a lot of PhDs. In fact, at any one time, there's probably about 500,000 PhD candidates in China at any one time. So this is a very fertile ground to develop, world-class engineers. And it's not surprising that China's companies such as ZTE and Huawei have accumulated a lot of patents. When we talk about 5G specifically, the way the process works is there's something called standard essential patents. And these are the patents that are the important patents that make up the standards for the 3GPP. And China has basically owns about 40% of those patents. So it's a pretty big block. Of that 40%, Huawei has their name on about 40% of that 40%. And then the rest are state-owned enterprises such as the China Aerospace Science Technology and also the China State Grid of China Corporation. So that's how China developed it. That was the policy. Now, when we get to the implementation, this is where China is very impressive. They didn't want to do like, for example, what Korea did, where Korea initially launched a non-standalone 5G and then later started to gradually introduce the standalone. China from the outset said, no, it's going to be standalone. And they held the telecom operators, which are also state-owned. So that helps with policy as well. And so China from day one has had standalone, which means that they can do network slicing. And this has opened up all sorts of opportunities. At any one time, China has probably 3,000 to 4,000 5G private networks across all the industries, from coal mining to railways to farming. And so the 5G strategy, on top of the previous 4G and 3G strategy, has created an environment where China basically has the most advanced 5G network in the world. And it has the largest cellular IoT connections in the world, sitting at over 2.5 billion. And many of these are going to be converted to the 5G RedCap standard in the next couple of years. So on all fronts, 5G, China is firing on all cylinders.
And what do you think about China's 6G prospects and the objective to have 6G commercially available by 2030?
Right. So 6G is an interesting situation because it's going to force operators, not just in China, to go to very high frequencies, possibly even sub-terahertz frequencies. Although the 3GPP is also trying to open up some frequency in the lower bands around maybe 10 or 12 gigahertz. But sub-terahertz is a totally different world. The electronics is very different. The materials, the power amplifiers, everything is very different. So China is not going to sit around and see what happens. They're very active in patents as well in 6G, and Huawei and the other Chinese organizations are providing a lot of intellectual property into the 6G. So we expect China to be at the forefront of 6G development. Although the only thing that I should caution is that the US, because of regulatory reasons, was not able to use the sub 6 gigahertz spectrum, which is 3.5 gigahertz, or what is called the C-band, until satellites were moved out of those bands. And so what happened in the United States is that Verizon and AT&T ended up using millimeter wave for mobile users, which is not the ideal way to do it. But the outcome of that is that today, for example, Verizon has over 2 million fixed wireless access users on millimeter wave. China has not allocated millimeter wave. And so I believe that as 6G is maybe 4 or 5 years around the corner, China is going to have to relook at their millimeter wave and sub-terahertz strategies.
Rory mentioned electric vehicles and robotics earlier. Besides wireless communications, Bill, where do you see Chinese industry and the government focusing investment?
Right. I think there's two areas. Well, there's three key areas. One, I think China is doing very well in, and that, of course, is anything with AI, whether it's large language models or small language models, vision analytics, video analytics. China has been at the forefront. And with a recent announcement from DeepSeek, it's pretty clear that China is is moving pretty fast in the AI space. The two areas where China needs to strengthen its capabilities is one is in space, and the second is in semiconductors. So let me address the semiconductors first and then the space. Semiconductor, the whole issue is that it turns out that there's only one company in all the world, ASML in the Netherlands, which makes a machine which typically costs between $200 and $350 million for a single machine. This machine is used to generate what's called extreme ultraviolet light, or EUV. And this is used to make chips with dimensions of 2 nanometers or lower, 3 nanometers or lower. And the United States put pressure on Europe to essentially prevent China from receiving that equipment. And that has put a major roadblock in front of China to develop the next generation of chips. So Huawei and other companies, which had been oftentimes they were going to TSMC or other Taiwanese contract manufacturers to make the chips. Now they can't do that either. So China has been forced to find a replacement for this and essentially create their own homegrown technology. A lot of people don't realize that the government has actually been funding this type of research, EUV and other related research, for a number of years, perhaps even going back 10, 12 years ago, to the tone of about, since 2014, $100 billion the government has put up for semiconductor research. The result is that this year there have been some announcements from China where they're making progress. Huawei is working with some universities, and they are becoming a lot more optimistic in China about the prospects for this homegrown technology. And it's very possible that they will be able to make their own sub 3 nanometer chips in the next few years. So, we'll have to see how it develops. But these are very, very complicated machines. There's a tremendous amount of sophisticated high energy physics and lasers that are used. But this is very important for China, so it's strategic. The other area is space. Perhaps if Starlink and SpaceX had not built a global network of over 7,000 LEO satellites, generating a potential switching capacity, or what is called downstream capacity, of over 800 terabits in the next few years. Just to put it in perspective, China Telecom's entire switching network for their fixed line is under 200 terabits for the whole country. What SpaceX and Starlink has created is, they're going to have 800 terabits in the next couple of years, and it'll probably go to 1,000. And after that, the point is that a U.S. company has built a global LEO network, which has done all sorts of things, including providing services in Ukraine during the war. So China realizes that it's very, very important to be in the LEO game. And as a result, China has 3 or 4 different LEO projects that are being planned. These are essentially commercial projects, but they're also getting government support. But because Starlink has moved so fast, I would say they probably have a 1 or 2 year lead on China with respect to the LEO orbits. In other space exploration, China is actually pretty aggressive. They have a program called the Lunar Exploration Program, and they have robots already on the dark side of the moon. They've set up 2 relay satellites so that you can transmit, because from the dark side of the moon, you cannot transmit signals to Earth. They transmit to the satellite and then back to Earth. So I would say overall, the space exploration program, China has been quite successful. But in the commercial LEO type of broadband connectivity, China is lagging, and they'll need to move pretty fast.
I mean, following on from that, I think there is a misconception still, especially in the West, that China is catching up to the US, whereas the reality is that China is no longer just a fast follower, but a comparable contender. Rory, what do you think about this, and how have we seen the concentration of technological power shift globally, let's say over the past 2 decades? And further to that, what impact do you expect this shift to have on geopolitical power?
Yeah, the shift in technological power has been extraordinary. We've gone from American and European firms bringing IP to China to now Chinese firms going the other way. BYD taking over Volkswagen factories in Europe, Cattle, the battery manufacturer, trying to set up in the US. A complete 180-degree flip on that. You look at academic publications, Global Data's patent database, various companies, comparisons, of advanced and emerging industries. China's at or near the top. And I think this is a pretty historic shift for 2 reasons. I think it's the first time, probably since before the Industrial Revolution, that a non-Western nation is at or near the leading edge in science and technology. And I think the first time ever that a still developing country, a relatively poor country, China's GDP per capita is lower than that of most of Central and Eastern Europe, is competitive in advanced science and technology. So that's historic breakthroughs. And the geopolitical implications are potentially profound, but still emerging, and I think will become increasingly clear over the next decade. And if these current trends persist, what we may well see is that Chinese technology, particularly hardware, underpins economic activity for the majority of people in the world. We could see here a choice of a cheaper Chinese product versus a higher cost, similarly technologically capable product produced by a developed market company. And in this case, for countries in South America, in Africa and Asia, the choice is generally going to be for the cheaper one. And this could lead to an emergence whereby it's DeepSeek, China's excellent telecoms, as Bill highlighted, robotics, Chinese EVs, Chinese clean energy, Chinese batteries, that is providing the underpinning for economic activity for most of the world outside of a small, high cost, advanced economic area, US, Europe, Northeast Asia. And you can sort of see this happening now. If you imagine a map, and we've got this in a couple of our reports, imagine a map of the world and you color countries red if they're using Huawei components in some of their 5G infrastructure. Use that as a proxy for China tech adoption. And you can see that it's basically a sea of red, with South America, Africa, Asia, mostly adopting Chinese Huawei 5G, and then US and Europe, primarily for security reasons, closed off. And I think those trends continue. And as a result, the relative shift in geopolitical power will move in China's favor over the coming decade.
So since the trade war began, how has the US impacted China's tech industry, particularly given its approach of imposing sanctions and trade restrictions? Would you agree that the trade war has counterintuitively expedited China's path to self-sufficiency?
Yes, completely agree. It's been it's backfired significantly in terms of what the US has been attempting. Rather than slowing China, it's been a catalyst for a much more active industrial policy from Beijing. We discussed above how the Chinese state utilizes industrial policy, and it's really been turbocharged since the first trade war. And in particular, there's a couple of elements that are worth noting on, not just the increase in resources, the heavier emphasis on industrial policy, but also the forced de-Americanization of supply chains. So Huawei has now been forced to look to what used to be smaller Chinese companies that were not competitive with foreign producers, but because they are local now and not at risk of US sanctions, Huawei, various other Chinese smartphone players, has been forced to work with them, give them resources, and bring them up to speed. So it's created an opening for these, at the time, relatively smaller Chinese companies. And so far, it has backfired significantly. DeepSeek being another prominent example, built on cheaper, lower tech NVIDIA chips. As Bill mentioned, there are still a number of choke points, notably ASML and some of the tools for semiconductor design. But for now, China is very well placed to continue its independent technology development.
And in light of more recent news, what impact do you expect the US imposed tariffs to have on China, should they be here to stay? And it's a tricky question to have, given that the situation is a moving target. But what are your thoughts as of today?
Yeah, we should probably give the dates of recording, because who knows what could change. It's the 22nd of April. But as of today, if the tariffs persist, they would be equivalent to a 2 to 2.5 percentage point hit to China's economy. So it's quite a significant blow, but by no means a knockout punch. Beijing has the capability to offset the loss of the US market, because that's effectively what we're talking about. 145% tariffs, trade basically goes to zero. Beijing has that capability, and we think it will utilize that. Going into this year, there was increasing signs of pressure on authorities to put a floor under economic activity to create jobs. And the political signaling on that has continued. Beijing, I think, has made it clear that there is now a policy put under the economy, under the property market, and under the equity market. And we're likely to see a decent sized fiscal stimulus that will drive domestic demand and offset most of the damage from the trade war.
Okay. Looking, I suppose, more internally within China now, in terms of the infrastructure and the energy supplies that underpin all these state-of-the-art technologies like 5G, 6G, AI, autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and all of those. You've touched on it a little bit, but Bill, would you say that this infrastructure is adequately developed? And what would you say are the technological challenges that China still faces?
I think as a general rule, the physical infrastructure is very advanced. China has, just give an example, on their smart grid, I believe they will have about a billion cellular connections. Their high-speed railways all have 5G signals. Why do they have 5G signals? Because they build the 5G base stations along the railways, specifically for the railways, so that they can do telemetric control and also provide high-speed internet to the passengers. Um, I think where China is going to be, so the physical infrastructure, China's infrastructure is quite advanced, whether it's the smart cities or highways or railways or other forms of transportation. I think the challenge for China will be software. And when you talk about software, the trend that appears to be evolving in the United States is that a lot of future software that's going to be developed will actually be generated by AI. It'll be code assisted by AI algorithms. If that's the case, if China takes that path, then that means that China's software will be created by not robots, but AI models. And so this is, I think, a very new experience for the planners and regulators where everything is carefully planned and budgets are carefully managed. AI has the potential to actually disrupt, the future plans within China as well. So I think this is going to be quite a challenge for not just China but other countries. How do you have regulation and safety and controls, but how do you regulate software that's being designed to learn and make decisions by itself? So I think that software is going to be the challenge for China, as it will be for other countries.
Let's talk more about China and AI deployment. To give some background to the listeners, at the end of 2024, the prevailing assumption was that China lagged approximately 1 to 2 years behind the US in the development of AI models. And this belief was partly due to the stringent restrictions on the export of NVIDIA GPUs to China, which severely limited the available computational power. However, the somewhat complacent view was challenged by the unveiling of DeepSeek's R1 model in January this year. And to say it took the US industry by surprise would be an understatement. Another Chinese startup, Manus AI, has attracted considerable attention, having similarly emerged from relative obscurity to develop what some argue is the world's most sophisticated AI agent. So, following on from that, very quick summary of just the past 4 months, Bill, what priorities do you think China has for AI deployment going forward?
Right. So I think the top-down approach that China is going to take here is, first of all, sustainability. All these data centers and 5G base stations and AI data centers, it's really driving up the energy usage in China to the point where it's probably data center and 5G together is probably 3% of the energy usage. And so I would say that the priority for AI technology is first the sustainability. China needs to get energy usage under control. That's the first priority. The second priority is control. Although people do not talk too much about it, DeepSeek, if you ask it sensitive questions, DeepSeek will not be able to answer. What I mean by sensitive geopolitical or domestic political questions. And so, is it really possible to have advanced AI technologies that are being controlled by the regulators so that, some answers are allowed and other answers are not? I think that this is going to be a really big challenge for AI. But if we're talking about autonomous vehicles, autonomous trains, robots, then the AI technology will be unleashed in China, and you're going to see, tremendous amounts of innovation. Not too different from what happened with TikTok. The way the world was caught by surprise with how capable TikTok was in creating very interesting videos and images. And so I think that what you're going to be looking at here is introducing AI technologies in the commercial sector to all aspects, whether it's agriculture or transportation, or things like future eVTOL, vertical takeoff landing machines. but overall, I think that the government will need to try to understand what are the limitations and dangers of AI technology. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of effort to try to figure out how to put all this, under control in a way that's manageable.
Thank you. We're coming to the close of today's episode, and I'm going to end by asking both Bill and Rory the same concluding question. I think it'll be interesting to hear the answer both from the geopolitical perspective and from the technological perspective. The question is, where do you see China's tech industry in the next 5 years?
I think that the answer to that really lies in what is going to happen with 6G networks. By introducing these very high frequencies, it means that for short distances, maybe 100, 200 meters, you'll be able to transmit 1 gigabit, 10 gigabit, maybe eventually 15, 20, 50 gigabits between devices, IoT modules, and whatnot. And that kind of bandwidth, that kind of capacity suggests to me a very, very advanced society. And so I actually think that if China accelerates the development of 6G, and of course it depends how the 3GPP develops the standards, and combines it with satellite technology, because I didn't mention it earlier, but satellite technology, for example, what Starlink is developing, their latest model called the V2 Mini is able to switch almost 100 gigabits of capacity on a single satellite. And between satellites, so what they call inter-satellite link, they can transmit eventually, not today, but it's still being developed, up to 200 gigabits between satellites, or at least 100 gigabit between satellites. The point to all this is that if you have terabits of capacity on the ground and you have it in the sky, in the base station and in space, you create a very, very sophisticated futuristic society. And I think China is actually going to be well placed to do that. They will become a global leader in the adoption and deployment of these technologies.
Yeah, I've spoken very positively on the China tech outlook from a broader sort of macroeconomic standpoint. If we zoom out a little bit, it's a somewhat less positive outlook. There's still a number of challenges facing China. We call them the 3Ds: debt, decoupling, demographics. These are quite large structural headwinds, not insurmountable ones, but problems facing the PRC that will require some quite tricky policy responses. So the misallocation of capital related to property is far from resolved. Raising consumption spending will require some very tricky fiscal and structural reform. Demographics are not as bad as most people assume, but will become an issue in over a decade's time. They're unavoidable. Demographics are destiny. And so absent a big productivity breakthrough that comes alongside the tech, and I remain very, very positive on the tech side. And I think Bill just outlined one of the ways that we could get this major productivity breakthrough that could potentially transform the Chinese economy. So absent that, and with those 3Ds, those structural headwinds, China is facing a managed slowdown. It's not a collapse into Japanification or a lost decade, as you may have heard a few years ago. It's a managed slowdown, and on a 5-10 year horizon, we will see a China that is highly advanced technologically, more powerful globally, probably providing tech underpinnings to most of the world, but also an economy that is growing at a slower rate.
That's all we have time for today. I would like to thank our guests, Rory Green and Bill Rojas, and a thank you to our listeners. From us in Strategic Intelligence, see you next time.